everyone. My name is Brittney Baer, and I am a nurse coordinator at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, specifically at Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center. And I am an immune effector cell nurse coordinator, specifically to the CAR T cell program here. And today we're kind of going to be talking about the logistics and patient monitoring of our outpatient CAR T program. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. So some background about our program here at Vanderbilt. Our first patient was treated with CAR T at VIX at our cancer center was in 2016 on a clinical trial, specifically ZUMA-1. At most centers, I'm sure CAR T started off in clinical trials, which is a great stepping stone to help us figure out logistics, which I'm sure it was great for most of your sites on how to figure out logistics and how we may be able to do this after FDA approval came about for all of our CAR T products. As you probably already know, Yescarta and Kymriah were FDA approved here in the US in 2017. Those were the first breakthrough therapies that were FDA approved. And as we know, both of these products required, at least Yescarta required patients to be admitted to the hospital for at least 7 days, starting with their day 0 infusion date. So a little CAR T timeline for those who don't know. In 2017, both Kymriah and Yescarta were approved by the FDA here in the US. And then in 2020, Tecartus was approved for relapsed and refractory mantle cell in adults. And then also Axicell or Yescarta was, the label was amended to include follicular lymphoma. In 2021, the FDA approved lisocabtagene maraleucel or Breyanzi for relapsed or refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in adults. And then also in 2021, the first BCMA targeting CAR T cell was approved for relapsed refractory multiple myeloma or idacabtagene visalucel. And then also in 2021, the FDA approved Tecartus or brexacabtagene autoleucel for relapsed refractory B-cell precursor ALL in adults. So that was really exciting for our adult patients with ALL. In 2022, another BCMA targeting CAR T cell was approved for relapsed and refractory multiple myeloma. In 2022, the FDA approved axacabtagene autoleucel as second-line treatment in diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. And then also in 2022, lisocabtagene was approved for second-line treatment in large cell lymphoma. So it's been a crazy timeline since 2017 with FDA approvals. So our program here decided we needed to get the ball rolling very early, starting in 2017 with a commercial CAR T program. So how do we move patients out of staying in the big house or the hospital? These are questions that we asked ourselves. How do we keep them out of the hospital? These are the 3 big questions that we asked ourselves. Why keep patients inpatient when no adverse events are occurring? We know that there are going to be days where nothing is happening to these patients. There's no CRS symptoms. There's no ICANS symptoms happening. Why should they be in the hospital during these times? How can we keep these patients monitored outpatient? And how can we admit these patients quickly if these patients experience side effects outpatient? So these were the 3 big questions that we asked ourselves. And how do we do it safely? So first you have to compose a team. So the team is probably the biggest and most important pieces of the puzzle to have this work as a well-oiled machine. Obviously, you need providers. We have all kinds of providers. So we have obviously physicians, and then we also have a wonderful group of mid-level providers composed of nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, et cetera. We also have obviously an IEC coordinator, which is myself. I like to think of myself as an air traffic controller, keeping everyone and everything moving smoothly, bringing patients into the program and following them throughout their entire process, almost like a patient navigator. We also have a financial coordinator, making sure that the patient's finances are approved and running smoothly. We have a social worker that's dedicated solely to our transplant program and CAR-T program. They make sure that the patient's needs are taken care of, such as lodging, food, expenses, et cetera. If they need any grant help, et cetera, that's their role. Obviously, the staff nurses play a huge role in this. They assist with the monitoring of these patients. They give the chemotherapy. They help assess the patients every day, et cetera. Administrators, we have, a team of administrators. They have to be on board with this program. They have to contract with the remote monitoring companies. They have to help contract with, the pharmaceutical companies that are bringing all these pharmaceutical companies with the CAR-T products on board, et cetera. We have pharmacists that are specifically assigned to our CAR-T program and transplant program, and they are a huge help with assisting us with keeping patients outpatient and also keeping our patients safe. And then we have a quality team that is dedicated to our transplant and CAR-T team. They are essential to our outpatient program because they help get your SOPs off the ground. Because you're building this program from start, you're going to need baseline SOPs that will get your program built and keep your patients safe. And that's essential to any program. So when we were building this outpatient program, we had to have SOPs on board. Some basic SOPs that we knew we needed to have were when to admit a patient. These needed to be pretty standard because, every provider is going to have different opinions on when the patient needed to go inpatient, which is fine, but obviously we need to have standard ones for every provider, every nocturnist, or every APP that was on call. So we have standard admission guidelines, but obviously every provider, knows patients and knows when to admit a patient when they have a gut feeling if the patient needs to go inpatient. You obviously need to have your REMS SOPs outlined for each product because each product has its own REMS requirements. We have patient eligibility SOPs because, every program needs to outline what kind of patient they're going to accept into their program. Some programs may be a little bit more liberal on what kind of patients they're going to accept into their program. And obviously there's going to be deviations into, if this patient's kidney function is a little bit less tolerable than other, organ function testing, but that's a case-by-case basis. But I know we have our certain patient eligibility and we have case-by-case basis that we go off of. And then obviously CRS and ICANS monitoring and how we're going to treat those side effects of CAR-T therapy. There are lots of grading systems published out there. So your program's going to have to decide which guidelines that are published out there that your program is going to adhere to, such as the ASTCT monitoring and treatment guidelines, et cetera. That's going to be up to you and your program, but it's a good idea to have that written out in an SOP so you know what your program is going to follow. So here at Vanderbilt, what do we do for our patient monitoring in the outpatient setting? So we utilize a remote monitoring platform. These remote monitoring devices constantly show us the patient's vital signs and will alarm us If the patient's vital signs go outside of the range that we set this normal range to. So these devices monitor the patient's heart rate, skin temperature, SpO2, respiratory rate, and the patients will take their blood pressures on demand certain times of the day. We also have a designated cell phone that our APPs carry 24/7 that is only for our CAR T patients. They're given this cell phone number on their day 0/infusion date. They have in-person clinic visits 1 time a day at 8 a.m. They have telehealth visits at 1600 or 4 p.m. And then they also have another telehealth visit at 10 p.m. or 2200. During these visits, these telehealth visits and clinic visits, we do an ICE assessment, which assesses their neurological status. And if we find that their ICE score is less than 10, we can admit them to the hospital. Or if we get an alarm on our phone or emails, because that's how the remote monitoring system alarms us, that their vital signs are, out of whack, then we can admit them if need be, or we can bring them into clinic if the clinic is still open, to assess them for any CRS symptoms. So this is just a snippet of what our dashboard looks like. As you can see, I couldn't show you a lot because it has patient information on it, but as you can see, the top number is the SpO2. This is the respiratory rate. Down here where it says 80 is the pulse. The skin temperature always shows a little bit low because it is skin temperature. So we also give the patients a oral thermometer. So we know if the skin temperature is going up, we can call them and tell them to take an oral temp because core temp is always higher than skin temp. So that's one limitation of the skin temperature model, but it's shown to be very effective regardless. So this is just kind of showing you the patient's first 14 days, because we know that usually the patient's really kind of risk factor 2 weeks for CRS and ICANS. So we continue these visits for 14 days. So again, the 8 a.m. clinic visit, at 12 p.m. they take a blood pressure on their own. It automatically comes over to the dashboard for us. And then at 4 p.m. we have a telehealth visit with one of our APPs. They also take a blood pressure. At 8 p.m. they take a blood pressure at home. At 10 p.m. they do a telehealth visit and they take a blood pressure. And then the circle begins again the next day. So what is one of our benefits to keeping patients outpatient? We have an outpatient transplant unit that is open 7 days a week. It's open from 7:30 to 5. It is open on weekends and holidays. It never closes. We have the ability to give tocilizumab outpatient, and it's attached to the main hospital. So if we need to take them to the ED, if we need to directly admit them, we're right there. So that's a huge advantage to us here at Vanderbilt. So of course there's issues with this monitoring. So it doesn't come without issues, of course. You have to ensure that the equipment is functioning properly. It's electronics. They always fail us, just like computers, etc. Your cell phone doesn't always work properly all the time. You have to make sure that the patient has adequate support, whether that's we're in Tennessee. Not everyone knows how to use a cell phone. Not everyone has a cell phone. Not everyone has Wi-Fi. So you have to ensure that they have Wi-Fi, they know how to use a cell phone. Some of these patients have never seen one. So some of them don't have adequate caregiver support to use a blood pressure cuff. So, and most importantly, you have to educate the patient, the caregiver, and the staff, because I can't be the only one that knows how to use this equipment. The nursing staff needs to know how to use it because I can't be on call 24/7. So there's always going to be issues. Equipment is going to go down at some point. it's happened before. There's been outages for the company that we've used and haven't gotten vital signs streamed to us. So it doesn't come without its issues. We know the majority of these patients will be admitted at some point during their CAR-T journey, whether it's for CRS or ICANS symptoms. We try our best to keep them outpatient as long as we can, but they're going to be admitted more than likely for closer monitoring. Every site that moves their program to an outpatient monitoring program will need to ensure that their program develops some type of working practice guideline or SOP that outlines criteria for admission, so there's little confusion between providers on, what's going to happen if these patients need to go inpatient. If a patient needs to be admitted, we try to avoid the emergency department unless obviously they're brought by EMS and there's no avoiding the ED. Here at Vanderbilt, we directly admit them to our myelosuppression unit. We have a room designated as our launching pad that is simply for direct admissions, and they will stay there until a permanent room opens up if there's not already one available already. This was a huge help during COVID because, there's a lot of patients, there was not a lot of hospital beds. So that room was always available for our patients if need be. So after the 30 days of follow-up are done in the OTU, they transition out of the outpatient transplant unit and they go to our long-term CAR-T clinic, which is run by a physician, a nurse practitioner, and myself. We follow them for long-term CAR-T related issues. It's every week on Thursdays, and it's like our long-term CAR-T follow-up clinic. So we follow them for as long as we can, really forever. And they also return home, and then we work in tandem with their local oncologist, so they do not have to come locally they don't have to come to Nashville constantly for their care, because a lot of patients do not live locally. They live all over a referral area. So how has outpatient treatment helped? Patients are much more comfortable staying at home or in their local lodging. This improves their quality of life rather than being stuck in a hospital room for multiple days to weeks. It saves the hospital money and it saves the patient money. If we're able to bill the infusion as an outpatient infusion, it allows for a much lower bill than an inpatient infusion. So that's a benefit, even if you don't think it is. It's a benefit to the patient ultimately. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the patients are enjoying this much, much more. They can, after their clinic appointments, they can go home, they can walk outside, they can go to a park, they can go to the grocery store if they need to. They can basically live their life versus sitting in a hospital bed staring at a TV all day. So some barriers that you may experience if this is something you would like to do at your site is a lack of staff buy-in. This wasn't met with no resistance here. It may take some convincing to know that this is safe and doable. Some sites may need some published data, and Vanderbilt is trying to prove that this is safe and effective on multiple fronts. We've published some papers that this is doable and more are coming. Not enough resources. Obviously, you need money to do this. You need staff, equipment, and time to get this program started up. It didn't happen overnight. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that we put into this. And then obviously clinic hours. If your outpatient clinic, cancer clinic is not open 7 days a week, it may pose a problem if something were to happen on the weekend or a holiday and the patient couldn't come in on a Saturday or Sunday. They may just have to be admitted. But it can still be done. So these are just some barriers I thought about, as I was doing this presentation that may pose a problem, but still can be done. And then any questions you can put in the chat box or the Q&A little button up there, and Dr. Delaria will read them out.
Thank you so much, Brittney. That was fantastic. I love that you not only cover from start to end, but you also kind of put in your personal take on each slide, because you've been with this program since its beginning. For all the audience members who have joined us, thank you so much for spending your morning hours or evening or late at night, wherever you're listening from in the world. We are happy to take any questions. Again, the purpose of this webinar is to really provide you guys an infrastructure and a schema to work with, where that way you can go to the higher ups, the big bosses, to request the resources, because that's where usually the process starts. It has to come from top down, not bottom up, because unless the institute has a buy-in and a commitment to provide the resources, each step becomes 10 times more difficult to execute. So let's see what we have in the chat here. First question is, who monitors the outpatient monitoring system, Brittney, in our center?
So during the day, I monitor them, and then at night, the nocturnist. So we have a team of overnight APPs that monitor them at night, and that's who does like that 10 p.m. telehealth visit. So that's who monitors them at overnight.
And what is usually, just for kind of building upon that question, let's say an APP record that, okay, there is a fever, or do a telehealth visit with a patient and notice some signs of neurotoxicity. What are the next step for that particular patient, depending on the clinical decision making? So who she calls, how the patient get admitted, if needs to be happen, like, can you walk us through, please?
Yeah, so if the APP notices that the I score is below 10, typically she will call either the CAR T physician on call or the transplant attending on call, and we'll discuss the situation with them. And then they will decide if it warrants an admission, and if so, then they will call the patient back and then directly admit them to our myelosuppression unit. Yeah. If it's overnight. If it's during the day, they'll bring them into the outpatient transplant unit, and then we'll admit them then.
Okay. And the similar workflow is for the weekend, or the weekends are different?
It's the same for the weekend, since our clinic is open on the weekends too.
Okay. And you may have covered it earlier, but we keep our stat bed available on our CAR T cell therapy unit 24/7. So we call it a landing pad, which is an acute care bed. And of course, you can pretty much do all telemetry monitoring, give tocilizumab, fluids, and even fixed dose pressors we can administer in that bed if needed to be. So it's very unusual actually for our CAR T patients to end up in an emergency room. In fact, I can't even think of the last time it happened. For the most cases, we are able to rescue them and admit them straight to our transplant unit, bypassing the emergency room. And I think that's an ideal way of doing things.
Yeah, I think it's been like 2.5 years since one ended up in the ED. So.
Yeah. One patient I recall went to the emergency room because there was an issue with the telecommunication devices and the phone problem. So, and he decided to just show up in the emergency room.
Exactly.
So second question from Bridget is that what monitoring systems we are using at our centers? And I know we have 2 different platforms for research and or commercial CAR T patients. So if you can walk us through, and I want to learn from you about like disadvantage, or if you have any favorite system among these 2.
So we use Current Health for our non-research patients. And then for our research, we use Bioformis. They both are great. I don't really have any disadvantages to either. I have more
I can tell you
experience with
from like my perspective, none of them are perfect, to be honest. I think
no.
each one of them had their own flaws and unique aspects. Um, the the battery issue is a recurrent problem. I think many of the sensors, the battery dies out, and it's not necessarily. It's just a technology, and we just need to
Yeah.
catch up. And so
Yeah.
over time, I'm 100% sure these devices will improve significantly, like we have our Apple Watches now, which can predict arrhythmias and everything. So I think we will reach that point. I was talking with one of our neurology colleagues a few weeks ago, and we actually have a remote EEG monitoring device also through our
Yeah.
epilepsy clinic. So at some point we may involve that, because we're trying to figure out if there's any predictive EEG changes before patient presents with an ICANN. So we really.
And I think they both have that capability. I just don't think we've added that on yet. So
yeah, and on from the physician side and APP side, there is of course an online portal where we can track all the vitals and stuff. And we had to really work with this company Bioformis, because this was their first rodeo of the CAR T patients. So we have to show them what data points are important to us, because previously in their old platform, it used to trigger for every heart rate above 100 and temperature above 100.4. So we came up with our own cutoff where the text messages goes to physicians or APP's cell phone, and you can customize this platform. And I think it's now much better and user friendly.
yeah, and Current Health has an app, which is super nice. They're just a bigger company, so they have an app, and that's super convenient for your phone.
Let's see how we kind of covered the on-call system, outpatient unit. One question from Misty is, can you describe our OTU or outpatient transplant unit? So how many beds we have or chairs we have, and what kind of medications we can give it, and what sort of nursing expertise we have there in that unit?
Yeah, so the OTU has 23 beds or chairs. There's 3 beds, rooms of beds, and
The isolation bed, yeah.
Yeah, a couple isolation rooms. We can pretty much give all drugs besides like ICU style drugs. Like we can't give obviously like pressors and stuff in there. But so yeah, the nursing is great. They can give obviously any high dose chemotherapy we need, because they do all of our transplants down there. So yeah, they have 23 chairs. They're open every day, holidays, weekends, snowmageddons, everything. So yeah, they are fantastic. We've given lots of TOSI down there. I don't know how.
Yeah, and all our nurses are, of course, oncology certified nurses. They've been doing chemo and transplant for years. And even when we hire the new trainees, they go through quite rigorous exams and the training and preceptor period before they independently are allowed to take care of the CAR T patient. So it's a very thorough, like a feedback system. Some of the interesting questions we have is, are we using any scoring system or risk stratification for people who you would preemptively admit? So I know our default is outpatient, but are there any patients we think that it's too risky to handle in a clinic and we will admit, and how we determine that?
Yeah, there's some patients that we've had since we started outpatient, strictly outpatient, that we have admitted. And typically those are patients that have had serious tumor burden issues. And we don't think it's safe to do it outpatient, but those have been very, very rare cases. I think we've only had like 1 or 2 of those since we've done outpatient that I can think of. And yeah, probably 2 that we've done that come off that I can think of off the top of my head. And one was like a post liver transplant patient that had like PTLD. And then the other was just very, very sick. And we knew that if we did not admit her, that it would be disastrous. So it usually has to do with their tumor burden and overall health if we do infuse them inpatient. So it's usually like a group decision between all of the transplant physicians if we need to admit them for their infusion. So it's not really taken lightly if we do admit them. It's usually a group decision between all of the physicians.
Yeah, and I can add a few lines here. So our default is always outpatient, but we use prophylactic dexamethasone in all our XSL patients, which has significantly cut down our early CRS risk. And we use early tocilizumab with a grade 1 CRS in many situations. So most of our patients are able to stay outpatient longer now. If a patient has high tumor burden on oxygen, on dialysis, in those type of situations, I think there's a case-by-case group discussion about admitting the patient on day 0 or immediately after CAR T infusion. But those cases are far and few, really. To answer another participant's questions, how many patients starts outpatient and end up getting admitted? I can take that, Brittney. So we recently actually analyzed our own outpatient CAR T, and paper is, I think, out now in British Journal of Hematology. And around a quarter to a third of the patient actually finished their whole CAR T journey outpatient. They never went in the hospital. So that's our success rate, but still around 2/3 of the patients will end up going in the hospital for 2 or 3 nights on average on to management of CRS or neurotoxicity. Few more questions we have here, Brittney. How many active patients we have currently, and on an average, like how many we can handle outpatient, because it does require a lot of resources, as you mentioned in your talk.
So usually right now we have, let's see, typically we try to keep the number around 4 active patients on telehealth right now. But we're looking to possibly hire somebody that strictly does the telehealth for these patients, like a APP that is just for these telehealth, so we can ramp up the numbers a little bit more. So that's me trying to like be kind and not, you know, make people mad. So so right now we've got like 3 going. So until we can get somebody that is completely dedicated, because the nocturnists also are the people on call for the entire like hematology oncology floor. So they're not strictly just dedicated to our CAR T patients. So they're taking calls for all of the other oncology patients overnight. So until we can get someone completely dedicated to the CAR T program, we have to keep those numbers nice to them because they can't just be on telehealth all night. So until then, I try to limit them to 4 telehealth at 10 p.m. So I have to arrange them kindly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it kind of fluctuating, and it's really a work in progress, but our capacity has significantly improved over the last 1 year. The unpredictable thing is the research enrollment, which really has picked up in 2023. And we do always follow, whenever there's a research CAR T infusion, we follow the protocol. And many of the CAR T, especially phase 1 protocol, do mandate patients be monitored for like a week to 10 days in the hospital. So those patients, of course, preemptively get admitted on the day 0 or even for lymphodepletion. But many of the advanced phases of clinical trial now, even on the CAR T side, are not mandating inpatient hospitalization. And in those patients, we're actually just replicating what we do for any standard of care CAR T. We have an experimental myeloma CAR T study, and we are infusing those patients outpatient and kind of following the same monitoring schedule and everything. So that does put a bit stretch on the system, but I think as we show that our outcomes are good and the patient satisfaction is extremely high, and there is no major safety events with this workflow, we are able to secure more resources. So I think that's been very helpful. There are a few questions along those lines about Brittney, like this landing pad. I know it's always a tug of war between administrators because they don't want to leave a bed empty in the hospital because that's the money right there. And one patient in emergency room not getting a bed, right? And so I get their argument. And from our perspective, we need the landing pad to safely execute our outpatient CAR-T program. So I know you were in several of this meeting with us. Can you just walk us through how was the early experience and what and how we are doing right now as far as the landing pad and like just our process of getting the secured landing pad?
Yeah, so it was met with a lot of resistance, but it's not only used for CAR-T patients, it's also used for like transplant and other oncology patients. So it's mainly used for transplant and CAR-T patients. So, you know, if a patient needs to go in for like their thymo infusion or their day 0 for transplant, it's also used for that. So that was our argument, is that if you're going to stick like general oncology patients on our myelosuppression unit that don't actually need to be on myelosuppression unit, then you can give us our landing pad. Because you're taking up a bed for a myelosuppression patient, you can give us a landing pad because you're putting a gyn-onc patient that probably doesn't need to be on our floor. You're taking up a room for like a leukemia transplant patient or a CAR-T patient. So that was kind of our argument to admin. So when they could go to like the general oncology floor, so they kind of caved on that, because, you know, they're putting general oncology patients on our myelosuppression floor where like leukemia patients need to go, transplant patients need to go. They can't go to a general oncology floor. So they kind of caved at that, because we need a bed on that floor. They can't go to a regular. They need HEPA filters. They need positive pressure rooms, stuff like that. So it was met with a lot of resistance, especially during COVID, because that's when we were trying to get this landing pad. They were trying to take it away from us, and luckily they didn't. So
yeah, and so it has worked out well, but I think if you show the data now, I think many centers have published their outpatient CAR-T experience, and most of the centers have kind of modeled very similar to what we have at our unit here. So it is not one-off thing, really. You have now data to support this practice across the country. So few additional questions. Brittney, if you can tell us a little bit about our local housing situation, about our patients, because most of our patients are not from Nashville or even Tennessee. So where do they stay, and how far they have to stay, and how long they have to stay?
yeah, so our patients are required to stay for 30 miles for 30 days. So if they're not local or within 30 miles, then we help them find lodging here, whether it's through grants, whether it's through the manufacturing company's housing program, or they unfortunately have to pay out of pocket. So, or their insurance. So there's multiple routes that we go. We work with our social worker, lodging coordinators, stuff like that, to try to get, you know, the cheapest option, help them financially find lodging. There's multiple places around here. Vanderbilt itself doesn't have like a place, but there is like the Hope Lodge through the American Cancer Society. There's multiple places here that do help cancer patients or hospital patients with reduced housing. So our social worker is great trying to find grants and help for these patients to stay locally. So that's how we house our patients here, but we use the heck out of some grants. So.
One question is that, like, what is our course of action if somebody is not tech savvy, like just doesn't know how to handle the equipment, like how we are doing the telehealth visit in that situation?
Yeah, so we do like test runs on telehealth. So I'll sit down and we'll do like a fake appointment, and we will teach them how to do the telehealth. So we've had a lot of very non-tech savvy people come through, and they have done it wonderfully. So we've had some like 85-year-olds come through that have never done anything like this, and they have done it flawlessly. So, and some people that have never looked at a computer in their entire life. So is it hard to teach some people? Yes, but they are teachable. So we've had some tough patients to get through it, but they have gotten through it. So it's not unheard of. So we just do a lot of education and reinforcement. And if they have problems, we just keep teaching them, and they get through it and they do really well. So I was very impressed.
Yeah, and I also work across the street at Vanderbilt VA Veterans Administration Hospital, and we have one of the country's only CAR-T program for VA healthcare system in the United States. So we do actually a large number of cell infusion there also, and we do come across this problem more often at the VA side because our patients are older with a lot of comorbidities, and they travel far away from us to come to Nashville VA to get the cell infusion. So we have admitted those patients for 5 to 7 days after the cell infusion in those situations, just for the safety purposes and kind of monitor them in-house. But our default is still to discharge them as soon as we can. So one question from Kara is, how long do you follow patients in long-term CAR-T clinic? I think we answered that question during the presentation. We follow them as long as they're really willing to come. We scan them for first 2 years, and after that, we see them every 6 months, kind of get them, make sure their IVIGs are replaced and the vaccinations are up to date, and we monitor for like late cytopenia or secondary malignancy. So some of the rare but significant late side effects of CAR-T survivors. So they get monitored very comprehensively, just like our post long-term CAR-T allo clinic. So one question is, oh yeah, this is a good one. So patients, commercial CAR-T, patients spike fever within 72 hours of cell infusion or CRS. Do you follow this 23-hour observation status to game the system? I know many centers doing it. So how do we handle, because technically the way the DRGs are calculated, Brittney, as you know, if the patient get admitted immediately after the CAR-T infusions, we don't get paid and all the drama which follows. So how we have handled this?
So we've handled it multiple ways. So it kind of depends on the provider on service. So some providers will try to treat the fever outpatient. They'll just give them some Tylenol, see if they spike again. Some providers will just automatically admit them and be done with it. Some providers will admit them under 23-hour observation also. It kind of varies, to be honest, from provider to provider. I've seen it done every which way. Like, I know Dr. Delaria will try to treat them outpatient, which is preferred, to be honest, because, you know, if they don't spike again, they can stay outpatient. I mean, it really varies.
I think in our center, patients come first, really. So we are quite separated from that administrative aspects of it. So we really don't have much pressure from anybody that, okay, you should not admit this patient, of course. So
exactly.
If patient needs to go to hospital, patient needs to go to hospital. If the patient needs to go to hospital for 5 days, that patient will stay in hospital for 5 days, really. So
exactly.
We just deal with the aftermath of whatever the financial implication. And I think recently they did updated their Medicare, at least, and they don't allow this anymore. So and so I think you just have to work with your administrator and figure this thing out. So let's see. So there were a few questions about, does our telehealth monitoring data goes into our EMR, and the answer is no. there is a way to do it, and we have Epic at our center, but currently we are not actually putting the blood pressure and the temperature logs into the EMR. It would be really good if you can. But
Yeah,
that's
we're
work in
actually working
progress.
on that now. Is the
Yeah.
EMR integration with our standard of care monitoring the research? No, but the standard of care with current health, we're actually working on that. So
And one question is, do we have like a flag in the patient's chart that they're CAR T recipient or an allo recipient, so
Mhm.
everybody in ICU or emergency room knows that this is a CAR T patient?
Yep. Yeah. So when they if they do go through the ED, it pops up like no corticosteroids or whatever. It does flag them. And then it also is on the sidebar. It says like allo CAR T or auto CAR T, and then it gives them their day 0. So it tells you how many days out they are, etc. So it does flag them.
Yeah. And let's see. And if the patients go to the hospital, like what are the discharge criteria when they are allowed to go back outpatient?
So it depends on what they went in for. So if they went in for like a fever, then typically we say like 24 hours fever free. And off of, and then if they went in for ICANS, then typically they have, obviously their I score has to be at least a 10. And like we've tapered some of their steroids down. So we know that they're not like becoming refractory to the steroids, and then their I score drops back down. So that's typically, at least what I've seen, what our criteria is.
Yeah, I
From my
think I
perspective.
agree. Yeah, I agree, Brittney. We wait till the CRS is 0 and I can say at least 0 or grade 1. And typically the steroid taper, we are doing it outpatient. We are not keeping them in hospital while dexamethasone is being tapered. But many times hospitalizations are prolonged because of infectious complications, steroid myopathy, nutritional issues. Sometimes patients go from ICANS to delirium, especially older patients on a lot of pain medicine. So I think that there are a variety of the reasons, of course, but from the specifically the CAR T related toxicity, I think we wait them till their CRS and ICANS are under well control. And they're stable, they're walking and eating and maintaining the fluid status independently. So I think that's pretty much it from my end. Anything else you can think of? Any last word of advice? Okay. So again, truly appreciate everybody to spending time with us, and then keep the question coming. This session will be archived on ISCH website subsequently, so you can review it at your leisure. And it's very easy to find email address for Brittney and mine, so don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. And thank you so much.
Thank you.